darkness of space was interrupted only by the glaring white of distant stars. Earth's atmosphere, a fragile sheet of life-sustaining gases, seemed so small in comparison to the vastness that surrounded it. The silence of this celestial sea was shattered by the abrupt, sharp crackle of an incoming transmission. A signal. Alien in origin. On the command deck of the Earth Defense Fleet's flagship Falcon, Commander Ulrich Voss stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face tight with grim resolve. His eyes, steely and focused, watched as the laser plasma displays flickered to life in front of him. The symbol of the Zarnok Empire appeared on the screens, a black circle with a jagged red crescent, a symbol of dominance. The transmission was clear, the ultimatum was unequivocal. Humanity, the voice came, low and mechanical, but unmistakably alien. You will surrender, or your extinction will follow swiftly. Voss's jaw clenched as he felt the weight of the words sink into him like an icy steel spike. He didn't flinch, but a sharp pang of discomfort twisted in his gut. He knew the scale of what was coming, knew the calculations. Earth was outmatched in every way. Their fleet, small and scattered, stood no chance against the Zarnok's overwhelming numbers and advanced technology. Every sensor aboard the Falcon screamed the same thing. Earth was on the precipice. Sir, their fleet is already positioned in low orbit, Lieutenant Tyrigzen said from his station, his fingers flying over his console. His voice was tight with disbelief, trying to process the sheer scale of the threat. Hundreds of ships, all armed. He paused, glancing nervously at the holodisplay. We don't even have the capacity to retaliate. Voss turned to face Zen, his voice cutting through the tension. We wait, he said calmly. But don't mistake this silence for fear. Earth does not surrender. The lieutenant looked up at him, uncertainty clouding his expression. Do you really think they'll negotiate? They'll wipe us out in days if we don't give in. Voss met his gaze, his eyes hard. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done so already. No, this is a test. They want us to kneel. They want us to bow, but we won't. We will fight. The tension in the room grew thick, palpable. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. But Voss stood unwavering, the quiet determination that had driven him in the past now solidifying his resolve. Above him, the laser plasma displays flashed once more, and a new transmission appeared on the main screen. The Zarnok command was speaking again, their voice rising from the depths of space like a cold, inevitable judgment. Your resistance is futile. Submit, or face your extinction. Voss didn't flinch. He was ready for this moment. Meanwhile, in the shadow of Earth's sprawling command centers, Lieutenant Ahron Mach, a skilled cybernetic strategist, was hunched over his own array of terminals. A room filled with blinking lights and a low drone of equipment, his hands moved swiftly over the interface, tapping into encrypted lines that had never before been touched by human hands. He was the best at what he did. None could deny that, and now, in this moment, he was the key to their survival. Voss's voice echoed through the comms, brief and direct. Ahron, how much time do we have? Mac paused for a moment, eyes narrowing as the hum of his thoughts raced with the rapid input of data streaming from his terminals. Not long. Their systems are locked, Commander, but I think I've found something. They've left traces. Small inconsistencies in their signals. Voss felt a flicker of hope. Do you mean a weakness? Mac didn't answer immediately. His fingers danced over the keys quickly and efficiently. Finally, he turned, his expression unreadable but serious. Yes, but it's more than that. These signals show irregularities. It's as if their command systems are riddled with hidden divisions. They're fractured. A new, sharp tension replaced the unease that had been lingering over the crew. Are you saying they're not as unified as we thought? Voss asked, eyes flashing with intensity. Mach nodded slowly. Exactly. They're expecting us to be defeated in days, but there's more to them than just their firepower. Voss stood straighter, his mind racing. The Zarnak believed their strength was in their overwhelming force, their ability to crush anything in their path. They'd expected Earth to buckle, to break under the weight of their demands. But what if the cracks within the Zarnak themselves could be exploited? We can't let them know we see it, Voss said, turning to the screen once more. Start working on it, Ahron. Find the connection, and we'll exploit it. If we can take down their communications, we take down their cohesion. If they can't control their fleet... His voice trailed off, but the implications were clear. Mach didn't need to be told twice. He immediately began setting up a more complex hacking procedure, deploying his most advanced algorithms to breach the Zarnak's deep systems. He was creating an invisible hand within the machine, ready to dismantle it from within. Voss's attention shifted to the window, where the full majesty of Earth stretched beneath him. The blue of the oceans, the white of the clouds, the green of the continents. His heart swelled with an emotion he could not quite name. This was his home, his people, and they were not going to fall without a fight. We're going to show them that humanity doesn't break, Voss murmured under his breath. Then, louder, he added, prepare the fleet, make sure they understand. Earth doesn't surrender, not now, not ever. As Voss prepared for the inevitable battle ahead, his mind was already working through countless possible strategies. Each scenario played out with cold precision. He knew the stakes, he knew the odds, but he also knew this. The Zarnak had underestimated them. The arrogance of assuming humanity would fold under pressure. That was their greatest mistake. Outside the command room, the rest of Earth's fleet was readying for the confrontation. Officers and soldiers alike could feel the shift. The Zarnak had arrived expecting submission. But what they had found instead was a commander who would refuse to yield. The hours stretched on, each one heavier than the last, and as Earth's leaders prepared to face the Zarnak, Voss stood firm in his resolve. The Zarnak had thought they could easily crush humanity, that their technology and power would bend Earth to their will. But the Zarnak had one thing wrong. Earth didn't surrender. The Zarnak had come with an ultimatum, but now, as the screens continued to flash their demands, Earth's forces stood poised to deliver a message of their own, and it wasn't one the Zarnak had expected to hear. The walls of the command center were lined with holographic screens, the faint blue glow casting long shadows across the room. Commander Voss stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the dark expanse of space, his mind racing with the weight of the decision that loomed. The Zarnak's ultimatum was clear, and the gap between their overwhelming power and Earth's feeble defenses seemed impossible to bridge, yet something inside him refused to accept the idea of surrender. There was always a way out, always a path to victory, even when it seemed impossible. Voss? A voice broke through the silence. Lieutenant Ahron Mach, the fleet's most talented cyber strategist, stood at his console, his fingers moving swiftly across the holographic interface. I've found something. There's a crack in their communications. Voss turned sharply, his gaze narrowing as Mach continued. It's subtle, but there's a discrepancy in the way they're transmitting orders. It's not the smooth, controlled network we expected. There's interference. I think they're struggling to keep all their factions aligned. Mach's words hung in the air like a key turning in a lock. Earth's greatest advantage in this war was their adaptability, their ability to fight with tactics born from limited resources. But if there was even a hint of dissent in the Zarnak ranks, if their command structure was flawed in any way, it was a vulnerability that could be exploited. Voss's eyes hardened as the implications of Mach's discovery sank in. Keep digging. Find out everything you can about their factions. I want to know where the fractures are. Mach didn't hesitate. His fingers flew over the interface, tapping in complex commands as his face remained fixed in concentration. The only sound in the room was the rapid tapping of keys. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke again. "Commander, I've cracked it. The Zarnok leadership is divided. There's a faction loyal to their current supreme commander and another that wants to overthrow him. They're planning to use this war as a way to gain power. That's why their communications have been so erratic." Voss felt a surge of hope, but he kept his voice measured. "Then it's time to show them we see their cracks. We won't just survive. We'll make them fight among themselves." Mac looked up from the terminal, his face filled with determination. "I'll send a message, quietly and to the right ears." While Mac worked his magic in the cybernetic shadows, Lieutenant Keel Rix, an expert in quantum computing and encryption, worked tirelessly alongside him. The hum of the servers filled the air, steady and constant, as Rix calibrated the equipment that would allow them to intercept and decode more Zarnok transmissions. Rix's fingers moved with precision as he manipulated a complex series of algorithms, his brow furrowed in concentration. The room was alive with the soft sound of the machinery working in overdrive. The artificial lights above flickered momentarily, casting a sharp contrast between the dark spaces of the room and the bright white of the screens. Despite the urgency of the situation, Rix's mind was focused solely on the task at hand. "We're on the right track," Rix said, his voice barely audible. He leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the lines of code as they danced across the display. "If we can get access to their quantum networks, we might be able to set up a countermeasure to disrupt their communications entirely." Voss walked up beside him, his footsteps heavy on the metallic floor, each one echoing through the otherwise silent room. "How long?" Rix didn't look up. His fingers hovered over the keys as he input the final string of code. "We're racing against time, but I'll have something for you soon. Their systems aren't impenetrable. They're just not used to human ingenuity." Voss watched him for a moment longer, taking in the quiet focus of the man who had never known defeat. Rix, with his sharp mind and unwavering confidence, was the best humanity had. If anyone could give them an edge, it was him. But the enemy they faced was ruthless, and even Rix's brilliance had its limits. "You're certain?" Voss asked, his voice low. Rix met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm certain." The following hours were a blur of rapid exchanges and constant updates. Mac and Rix worked in tandem, exploiting every weakness in the Zarnok's communications that they could find. It wasn't just about hacking into their systems, it was about planting seeds of doubt. Their plan was simple: cause enough disruption to make the Zarnok's leadership second-guess every order. Make them question their command structure. Make them question their authority. It would be like dropping stones into a pond, rippling out in waves, eventually leading to chaos. "Everything's in place," Mac reported, finally looking up from his terminal. "Their internal communications are scrambled. They won't be able to coordinate their forces effectively for the next few hours. They'll be too busy fighting each other to worry about us." Boss nodded, his face expressionless. "Then it's time for our first strike." The plan was simple, but the stakes were anything but. Earth had one shot at this. One chance to show the Zarnok that humanity wasn't just going to roll over and accept defeat. Voss stood in front of his crew, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. His voice was steady, unwavering. "We've been given an opportunity. The Zarnok are divided, and if we act now, we can strike before they even realize what's happening. This will be a test of our resolve. We will send them a message they can't ignore. Earth does not yield." The team moved quickly, executing their plan with military precision. Fighters were launched, stealth drones already en route to the designated target, an important Zarnok relay station on one of their smaller ships. The mission was dangerous, the outcome uncertain. But it was a message. Earth would fight. As the drones penetrated the Zarnok fleet's outer defenses, Voss watched as the first strike was launched. It was small, hardly a victory in the grand scale of things, but it was enough. Enough to make the Zarnok take notice. The relay station's systems were disrupted. The Zarnoks scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. Earth had already shown them that resistance was not only possible, it was inevitable. The mission, though small, was the first of many. As Voss turned back toward the command center, the hum of activity around him grew louder, the urgency increasing. They had taken the first step. The Zarnok were no longer untouchable, and in the quiet of the command room, as Voss looked out toward the stars, he knew one thing for certain. Earth was no longer a helpless target. The war had only just begun. The low hum of machinery filled the control room, punctuated only by the rapid tapping of fingers against keypads. Commander Voss stood at the heart of the operations center, eyes scanning the holographic map that displayed Earth's fleet in orbit. The plan was simple: a coordinated strike to send a message to the Zarnok, a message that Earth wasn't helpless, that the small victories would add up, that their first step had already been taken. Lieutenant Aaron Mack stood beside him, his fingers moving swiftly over a terminal, eyes flicking between the lines of encrypted code that filled the screen. "We're ready," Mack said quietly. His voice, though calm, carried a weight of determination. "The virus is in place, Commander. It'll target their command nodes. If we can disrupt their relay stations, we'll set the tone." Voss finished for him. "They'll know we've made our move. Start the sequence." Mack nodded without hesitation, his fingers punching the final command. The room filled with a soft series of beeps, the energy in the room shifting as the virus began its infiltration. On the main screen, Earth's forces moved into position, ready to support the cyber strike. The virus, crafted from salvaged Zarnok tech, moved swiftly through their command nodes. Every line of code had been meticulously crafted by Lieutenant Keel Rix and Mach himself. A silent weapon, precise but deadly. It would cripple their communications just enough to cause confusion in their ranks. "Targets in sight," Rix's voice broke through the momentary silence, bringing everyone's attention back to the displays. The first strike was imminent. The Zarnok, confident in their superiority, hadn't expected any resistance. Their fleet was vast, their technology far beyond anything Earth had managed to muster. They dismissed the small glitch in their relay network as a fluke. The Zarnok command leadership, while vast and powerful, had been assured by their military successes. A simple disruption, a minor setback at worst. But as the virus began to spread, it triggered a cascade of failures within their ranks. Slowly at first, then with increasing frequency, Zarnok communications began to falter. Messages were delayed, reports misdirected, commands lost in translation. Internal systems that were supposed to provide real-time updates to the fleet began to stutter and crash. Voss watched as the first signs of chaos unfolded on the screen. Their first success. It wasn't much, barely a blip on the radar in the context of the entire war, but it was enough to start sowing doubt. Enough to make the Zarnok wonder if they had truly underestimated their enemy. "Commander," Max said, his voice tight. "Their network's fragmented. They're sending conflicting orders to their fleet. There's no cohesion between them." Voss looked over the results, his expression unreadable. "Excellent. We've found the weakness." He turned to the tactical officer, his voice sharper now. "Deploy the decoy strike. Use their transponders. Make it look real." Lieutenant Tark Zen's hands flew across his console, the room tense with expectation. As the team activated the decoy strike, Earth's fleet began to mimic Zarnok movements. Using hacked Zarnok transponders, they simulated fleet movements in the same pattern as the Zarnok's usual strategies. The strike was deceptive, appearing as a coordinated offensive, but in reality, it was a ghost. The Zarnok, already disoriented from the earlier communications breakdown, reacted in predictable panic. Fleet leaders scrambled, issuing commands that contradicted each other as confusion spread like wildfire. Some ships engaged in defensive maneuvers, believing they were under attack. Others moved to reinforce positions that were already secure. The chaos intensified as the fake fleet movements triggered Zarnok responses, sending ships hurtling in all directions. Commanders barked orders to deploy additional ships, chasing after phantom threats that didn't exist. Zarnok commanders, not yet fully aware of their internal vulnerabilities, found themselves reacting instinctively, further unraveling their grip on the situation. Voss's eyes were sharp, tracking every movement. The decoy was working. The Zarnok were being stretched thin, pulled into a frenzy of misdirection. Panic had begun to take root among their ranks. As Earth's ships moved through the shadows of the conflict, keeping their distance from the chaos unfolding among the Zarnok, the tension in the room grew thicker. This was more than just a strike. It was a test of their will, a test of their resolve. "We need more," Voss muttered to Mach, his eyes never leaving the screen. "The Zarnok are still too confident. This disruption, it's not enough. We need to push them harder." Mac nodded, his mind already processing the next steps. "We'll exploit their disarray. Once their fleet is in full disarray, we'll target their supply lines. That'll cripple them for good." Rix, who had been silent up until this point, looked up from his station, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling determination. "We could also leverage their own encrypted channels. If we keep this up, we'll have access to everything. I can feed misinformation into their command systems, make them question everything they thought they knew about their own forces." Boss nodded slowly, his mind working through the implications. This wasn't just a cyber strike. It was psychological warfare. The Zarnok were a massive empire, but their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility of human ingenuity. Earth had outsmarted them once. Now they would do it again. "Make it happen," Voss said, his voice firm. Back on Earth, the first results of the strike were already coming in. Zarnok's supply lines were in disarray, their logistical systems scrambling to compensate for the fake fleet movements. The Zarnok were overextended, their forces split, their focus divided. It was exactly what Voss had hoped for. The attack wasn't a victory, it was a warning. As Voss stood in the command room, the air thick with tension, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of something deep within. Hope. For the first time since the Zarnok had arrived, it wasn't just about survival. It was about something greater. It was about taking back control. And as the decoy strike continued to unravel the Zarnok's military strength, one thing became clear to everyone in the room. Earth was no longer a target. It was a threat. The decoy was small, but the message was clear. The Zarnok had underestimated Earth. The silence that followed their initial successes was deafening. Earth's forces, emboldened by the small victories they had carved from the Zarnok's overconfidence, waited in anticipation for the inevitable retaliation. They didn't have to wait long. The first Zarnok bombardment struck the coastal city of New Orleans. The explosions rang out like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the city. Buildings crumbled in moments, and the once thriving streets were flooded with dust, smoke, and the sounds of distant screams. Earth's civilians were scattered, disoriented, and terrified. The Zarnok had made their move. But for Commander Voss, the city's destruction was not the end of the line. It was the beginning of something else entirely. "Don't flinch," Voss said softly into the comms, addressing the officers who stood around him. His voice was firm, unwavering. "We adapt. We retaliate. Earth fights back." Lieutenant Mack, standing at a nearby station, shifted his gaze toward Voss. "They're coming for the cities. They'll try to break our spirit." Voss nodded grimly. "They'll fail. I know how they think. They'll strike hard, but they won't know how to handle what comes next." In the aftermath of the bombardment, Earth's military leadership was forced to confront a new reality. The Zarnok had deployed their most powerful weapons in a calculated move to break human will. But Voss had seen it before. In his experience, a direct assault on Earth's cities wouldn't crush their resolve. It would make them more determined. The strength of humanity was in its ability to endure, to adapt, and to fight back from the ashes. Voss turned toward his team. "We're not just going to sit here and wait. We're going to fight them on our terms, using the terrain we know best. Start the guerrilla campaign." The initial stages of the campaign were designed for mobility, precision, and sabotage. Earth's forces, once thought of as slow and clumsy compared to the might of the Zarnok, now moved with calculated fluidity through urban environments. The Zarnok had never seen anything like this before. Humans didn't fight by the book. They fought by instinct, adapting quickly, making use of every advantage no matter how small. Lieutenant Elena Ruiz, now commanding a team of specialists, was the spearhead of Earth's counteroffensive. She had lost her brother to a Zarnok attack months earlier, and every decision she made, every mission she led, carried the weight of that loss. But her grief was more than just a personal wound. It was a fuel that powered her determination. "We've got a fuel depot," Ruiz said, her voice gritty with resolve, as she crouched in the dimly lit command center. "I need a squad to take it out. It's their lifeline." The plan was simple: disrupt the Zarnok's fuel supply. The depot was well protected, nestled deep within a heavily fortified industrial sector. The mission would be dangerous, there was no question about that. But Earth's forces were no longer strangers to risk. In fact, it was the uncertainty that had become their greatest asset. The air in the command center felt thick as the team suited up, each one preparing for the mission ahead. Ruiz led the charge, her eyes steely as she addressed the squad. "We'll move fast, in and out. We're not there to fight. We're there to cripple. This depot won't be their last." The strike on the Zarnok depot unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. The team infiltrated through the shadows, using Earth's natural environments to their advantage. It wasn't just the streets of cities they knew well. It was the wilderness, the mountains, the forests. They used every facet of the terrain to evade detection. Their movements were fluid, like water coursing through cracks in a dam, escaping when least expected. When they reached the depot, they didn't engage in full-scale combat. They didn't need to. Ruiz's team deployed explosives with surgical precision, targeting key weak points in the fuel storage systems. The explosions rocked the depot, sending fireballs into the air, and the ground shook beneath them. The supply lines were crippled, one small victory at a time. The Zarnok forces scrambled, confused and slow to respond. "Mission accomplished," Ruiz said into her comms, a sharp smile crossing her face. "The Zarnok will be feeling that for days." Back in the operations center, Voss stood before his map, tracking the progress of the strike. The situation was still fluid, and the full impact of their campaign hadn't yet been realized. But the first successes were undeniable. It wasn't enough to defeat the Zarnok, but it was a powerful statement. "Get ready for their reaction," Voss muttered, his eyes scanning the flashing indicators on the screen. "They'll retaliate." As predicted, the Zarnok responded quickly. In the hours that followed, they launched another wave of bombardments, this time on several key industrial sectors across Earth's major cities. But their strategy was becoming clearer. The Zarnok were desperate to crush human morale by inflicting widespread destruction. They didn't realize yet that it wasn't fear they were sowing, it was resolve. The Zarnok hadn't expected humanity to be so resilient, so quick to adapt. Their rigid command structure, built on unquestioning obedience, was failing them. They didn't know how to handle the unpredictable nature of Earth's tactics, how to counter the guerrilla strikes that continued to disrupt their plans. It was starting to fracture their leadership. Internal communications were now chaotic, as officers scrambled to coordinate responses that weren't coming in. "Keep the pressure on," Voss ordered. "We're not just hitting their logistics anymore, we're hitting their pride." The final phase of the guerrilla campaign was already in motion. Ruiz's success had exposed a vulnerability, and now Earth would capitalize on it. Every attack, every strike on Zarnok resources served to highlight their weakness. The Zarnok couldn't maintain the pace. They didn't understand how to fight a war like this. The human response was unpredictable, and as long as they kept pushing, kept adapting, Earth's forces had a chance. In the streets of the cities, in the hidden corners of Earth's industrial zones, humanity's spirit was rising. The Zarnok had thought their victory was assured. They had thought the human race was weak, disorganized, too divided to fight back. But as Earth's forces continued to strike, as cities like New York, Berlin, and Sydney fought back with a ferocity that only humans could understand, the Zarnok found themselves scrambling. Voss stood in the command center, staring at the latest reports, a small, grim smile forming on his face. The Zarnok had underestimated them. They'd learned nothing from their first mistake. Now it was Earth's turn to teach them a lesson. And the lesson was clear. The Zarnok had failed to recognize one fundamental truth about humanity. Earth didn't surrender. The war was far from over. But Earth had shown its first real victory. The sound of distant artillery fire echoed through the command center as Voss paced before the display, the weight of the war bearing down on him with every passing minute. Earth's forces had managed to strike decisive blows against the Zarnok, but the war was far from won. Yet there was a shift in the air, something subtle but undeniable, the first real sign that the tide was turning in their favor. Lieutenant Mack looked up from his terminal, his face tense. "Commander, our forces are gaining ground. The Zarnok are scrambling to respond. It's starting to show. They're stretched too thin." Boss nodded, his fingers pressing against the smooth edge of the table. "That's not enough. They still have the advantage. It's not just about striking them where it hurts. We need to break their spirit. We need to turn this war into something they can't control." He paused, thinking. What do we know about their leadership? Mock's fingers flew across the keyboard. They're fractured, Commander. There are factions within their ranks, but they've been holding it together, barely. There's been rumblings of dissent, particularly from the military elite. They're losing their grip on power. Voss's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. It's time to fan those flames. We'll plant the seeds of doubt. Make them second-guess every order. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Keel Rix was busy in the cyber ops room, his eyes flicking back and forth across a row of encrypted Zarnok transmissions. A series of intercepted communications had revealed hints of defections and unrest within the Zarnok High Command. It wasn't just tactical information, it was a psychological weapon, one that could fracture their unity from the inside. Rix tapped in a final command, his voice low as he relayed the orders to Mac. "I've uploaded the false reports. The timing's perfect. If their command structure is already unstable, this will push them over the edge. We're feeding them disinformation about mass defections within their fleet, planting rumors about betrayal at the highest levels. It'll sow distrust among their commanders." Boss, listening intently, nodded. "Let's see if we can't get them to destroy themselves from within." The message, once delivered, would spread like wildfire through their ranks. The Zarnok, used to their iron-fisted rule, would never expect their own officers to question authority. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. If their leaders could no longer trust each other, their military strength would crumble under its own weight. The days following the psychological operation were tense. The Zarnok, true to Voss's expectations, fell into chaos. Reports flooded in from the front lines. Orders were ignored, divisions disobeyed, and factions began to splinter. Voss had known their rigid control would eventually betray them. Now, they were reaping the consequences. As the Zarnok forces struggled to maintain order, Voss's next move was already in motion. Earth's forces, fresh from their recent successes, were ready to strike at the heart of the Zarnok's command structure. "Rix," Voss said, turning to the quantum computing expert, "it's time to cripple their communication capabilities. Hit their central hub. If we take out their coordination, they'll be in total disarray." Rix didn't hesitate. "I've been tracking their communications for days. I'll ensure the strike is clean, nothing they can recover from." The target was clear: a heavily fortified Zarnok communications hub located on a remote moon. It was their central nervous system, the critical node connecting their various fleets and strategic units. If Earth could sever this lifeline, the Zarnok's long-range coordination would crumble, and the tide would shift permanently in humanity's favor. Voss watched as the first phase of the operation commenced. A team of Earth's most skilled operatives, including Ruiz and her elite unit, moved into position. They would infiltrate the moon's surface and plant explosives to bring down the communications relay. Their movements were quiet, calculated. Nothing was left to chance. As the team approached the hub, Ruiz's voice crackled through the comms. "We're in position, Commander. 1 minute to detonation." Voss gripped the edge of the table as a bead of sweat slid down his forehead. He knew the risk. The Zarnok were notorious for their countermeasures, but they had no idea Earth's forces were so close. The tension was unbearable as Voss awaited the news that would determine their fate. "Target destroyed," Ruiz's voice rang out, calm but laced with the unmistakable thrill of success. "We've crippled their ability to coordinate. They'll be blind for the next 48 hours. Voss exhaled sharply, a rare moment of relief flooding his chest. The Zarnok's communications network was in shambles. The next phase of the campaign was already underway. The fallout was swift. With no central command, the Zarnoks scrambled to reorganize. The confusion among their ranks was palpable, and Earth's forces moved swiftly to capitalize on the disorder. Tactical units attacked key Zarnok supply depots, cutting off vital resources. Others launched raids against strategic outposts, pushing into territory once thought untouchable. "We've got them on the back foot," Voss said to Muck, watching as the Zarnok fleet dispersed in every direction. "They're losing their hold." Mac's expression was grim, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "If they can't regroup, this is over. We've broken their will to fight." The Zarnok's confidence, once an unshakable force, had been shattered. Their pride had been wounded, and they no longer moved with the same imposing certainty. Earth had proved that they could adapt and fight in ways the Zarnok could never have anticipated. As the battle for control shifted, Voss's forces pressed deeper into Zarnok-controlled territory. Every strike, every victory fueled the next. The momentum had shifted, and the Zarnok were losing ground faster than they could recover. The Earth forces, bolstered by their recent successes and morale-boosting broadcasts, pushed forward, exploiting every weakness in their enemy's defenses. Voss stood on the bridge of the Falcon, watching as the map of the battlefront shifted in real time. The Zarnok no longer controlled the skies. Humanity had gained the upper hand. "We're not done yet," Voss said, his voice firm. "But the Zarnok are finished. We've only just begun to show them what it means to face humanity's fury." As he spoke, a broadcast blared across the fleet, a message to the world and to the Zarnok. "Earth will never bow, and today we rise." And with that, the momentum was theirs. The Zarnok's confidence had faltered, and humanity's will had proven stronger. The tide had turned. The tension in the command center was suffocating, the air thick with anticipation. The Zarnok had made a critical mistake. They had placed their command center, the heart of their fleet, within reach. The flagship, Zalgaroth, was a towering monolith of terror, a fortress in the sky that had crushed every challenge that dared to stand against it. And now, Commander Voss had formulated a plan to bring it down. "We strike at the core of their command," Voss said, his voice steady but laced with a hard edge. "We cripple their flagship, and their fleet will crumble. Ruiz, you and your team are the spearhead." Lieutenant Elena Ruiz, her face hard as stone, nodded without hesitation. "We'll be in and out. Nothing the Zarnok can throw at us will stop us from completing this mission." Her words, cold and clipped, were delivered with the sharpness of a blade. She had known loss, knew it more intimately than most, but in moments like this, when a chance at vengeance call, She was a force of nature. The Zarnok had killed her brother, and now they would face her wrath. The plan was audacious. A small team of highly trained operatives, led by Ruiz, would infiltrate the Zalgarath, reach its inner sanctum, and plant charges on the energy core. Once detonated, the flagship would be crippled beyond repair, but the risks were staggering. The Zarnok, with their advanced security systems and overwhelming numbers, would fight to the bitter end. Every second counted. The team moved in tight formation, their footsteps silent against the smooth metallic floors of their stealth ship. As the docking bay doors hissed open, Ruiz's breath came in short, controlled bursts. The ship's interior was dimly lit, the oppressive silence only broken by the occasional shift of the crew. The lights above flickered, casting long, unsettling shadows along the walls. This wasn't a place for mercy. This was a fortress of death, and they had no intention of leaving it intact. "HAL teams in position," Ruiz whispered into her comm, her voice cold but precise. "We move fast, we hit hard. Stay sharp." The first obstacle appeared as they navigated through the darkened corridors of the flagship. Zarnok soldiers, clad in their heavy exoskeletons, patrolled the narrow passages. The human team didn't hesitate. In a blur of motion, they neutralized the first two guards with practiced efficiency. The soft thunk of a suppressed weapon was the only sound, but it was enough to send a ripple of alarm through the Zarnok's senses. The team was on their way in. As they moved deeper into the ship, the resistance grew fiercer. The Zarnok, realizing that their defenses had been breached, reacted with brutal efficiency. The corridors of the flagship, once a place of cold, calculated order, became a battleground. The sound of footsteps, the metallic clang of weapons clashing, and the occasional scream filled the air. But despite the overwhelming odds, Ruiz and her team pressed on, driven by a singular purpose. Ruiz led the charge, her rifle aimed at every corner, her mind focused on the objective. The mission wasn't about fighting, it was about survival. They had one goal: get to the energy core and destroy it, no matter the cost. The first close-quarters combat occurred when a Zarnok patrol cornered them in a narrow hall. The team's weapons roared to life, silent shots cutting through the air with deadly intent. A Zarnok soldier fell with a thud, and another was knocked off balance as Ruiz kicked him into the wall. Blood and sweat mixed in the heat of battle, the sharp sting of metal against flesh filling the air. "Push forward," Ruiz barked, her voice hard, commanding. "We're not here to fight. We're here to win." The rest of the team moved with deadly precision, covering each other's backs as they navigated through the labyrinthine corridors. The Zarnok were relentless, but Earth's forces were not just fighting back. They were adapting. Every decision was calculated, every move deliberate. They had learned from their earlier skirmishes, and now they were applying that knowledge in real time, using the flagship's very structure against its defenders. As the final security door to the energy core room loomed ahead, the tension was palpable. Ruiz's hand gripped her weapon tighter, the familiar weight of it grounding her in the chaos. Her team moved to the edges of the doorway, preparing to breach. The countdown to detonation had already begun. If they failed now, everything they had worked for would be for nothing. "Ready?" Ruiz whispered, glancing at the faces of her squad. They nodded, determination flashing in their eyes. They were ready. With a deafening crash, the door exploded open. The team rushed in, guns raised, but what awaited them was not just a challenge of firepower. It was a race against time. The core room was a massive chamber, its heart pulsating with unnatural energy. The Zarnok had installed complex systems to safeguard it, but none of that mattered. They were already inside. But the Zarnok weren't going down without a fight. As the team pushed toward the core, the final wave of resistance hit them. Zarnok soldiers poured into the room, their exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh lights, weapons raised high. The gunfire was deafening. Each shot sent vibrations through the air, each impact a reminder of how high the stakes were. The Zarnok advanced relentlessly, their numbers overwhelming. Ruiz, face set in stone, fired shot after shot, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. But the Zarnok had underestimated them. Earth's forces fought with a fury that the invaders couldn't comprehend. Every inch gained was hard-won, and every moment felt like it might be their last. Yet, despite the odds, they continued to push, refusing to yield. And then, in the midst of it all, Ruiz saw her target. The energy core. The heart of the Zalgarath. Her mind locked onto it. There was no hesitation. Her team was holding their ground, but it was clear. Only one thing mattered now. She would make sure they couldn't stop her. She sprinted forward, her heart pounding in her chest as she planted the charges on the core. "Charge set," she shouted, her voice a mix of triumph and defiance. But as she turned to rejoin her team, a Zarnok soldier appeared from the shadows, slamming her into the ground. She fought back, but the strength of the soldier was overwhelming. She knew what needed to be done, even if it meant her sacrifice. With a final, desperate push, she detonated the charges, sealing the fate of the Zalgarath. The explosion was deafening, a violent shockwave of heat and force that ripped through the room. The flagship's core, now crippled, began to implode. The Zarnok, leaderless and disorganized, had no chance. As the flagship erupted in flames, Ruiz's final act of defiance sent ripples through the Zarnok fleet. Their command structure was shattered. The battle was won, but at an immense cost. And for Ruiz, her sacrifice would never be forgotten. As the ship burned, Voss stood on the command deck, watching the destruction unfold. The Zarnok had been dealt a devastating blow. Earth had struck at the heart of their power, and the war would never be the same again. The Zalgarath was gone. The flagship, once the symbol of Zarnok dominance, now drifted as a twisted heap of smoldering wreckage, its lifeless hull being swallowed by the darkness of space. The tremors of its destruction rippled through the Zarnok fleet, causing disarray and confusion that spread like wildfire. The Zarnok, who had once felt invincible, now floundered in chaos. Their leadership, already fractured from internal strife, began to disintegrate completely. Without their central command structure, the fleet faltered, their coordinated responses dissolving into disorder. The carefully calculated terror that had once defined their presence in the galaxy was now replaced with fear and panic. Commander Voss stood before the command display, watching as the chaos unfolded on the screen. The Zarnok ships, once so sure of their superiority, were now scattered and disorganized. Earth's forces had taken advantage of the fragmentation, launching relentless attacks against their vulnerable supply lines. "Target their rear defenses," Voss ordered, his voice steady but firm. "Don't let up. Push them back." The fleet moved with purpose, each maneuver designed to exploit the weakness of the Zarnok. As Earth's forces engaged, the Zarnok ships faltered under the pressure. The previously indomitable Zarnok had been broken. Their pride had been shattered, their empire reduced to a fractured mess. "Are we sure they're not regrouping?" Mac asked, his voice tense as he analyzed the data. "We can't assume the fight is over." Voss shook his head. "They're done. Their flagship was their heart. Without it, they have no direction. They'll retreat, and when they do, we'll make sure they can't return." As Earth's forces continued to push forward, Ruiz's death weighed heavily on Voss and the team. Her sacrifice was a final act of defiance, and every victory since then felt like a tribute to her spirit. Each success, no matter how small, seemed to echo with her absence. But the battle wasn't over. Despite the emotional toll, Earth's resolve only grew stronger. Voss could feel the weight of their collective grief, but he also knew they couldn't afford to stop now. The Zarnok had been dealt a crippling blow, but there was no room for complacency. In the operations room, the mood was heavy with a quiet resolve. "Ruiz didn't die for us to fail," Voss said, his voice low but resolute. His eyes swept over the faces of his team, each one haunted by the memory of their fallen comrade. but each one determined to see this through to the end. We've bled for this. We finish it. The next phase of Earth's strategy was swift and merciless. The Zarnok, reeling from the loss of their flagship and now leaderless, could not react in time. Earth's forces had the momentum, and they pressed it with precision. Small, tactical units hit Zarnok supply depots, ammunition stockpiles, and fuel reserves, forcing their enemy into a retreat. Each strike was surgical, every target chosen with care. The Zarnok, unable to defend their rear or hold key positions, were left vulnerable. Voss watched as the tide of the battle shifted, his mind calculating each move. The Zarnok's once pristine defenses were crumbling under the weight of Earth's relentless assault. The fighting was fierce, but Voss could see the cracks in the enemy's resolve. The Zarnok, their forces scattered and confused, were no longer the unstoppable juggernaut they had once been. "We've got them where we want them," Max said, a hint of relief in his voice as he observed the collapsing front. "They're retreating. They're pulling their forces back." Voss nodded grimly. "It's not over yet. We follow them until they have no place left to run." The war had come to a head. The Zarnok, once invincible, now faced total collapse. Their empire, built on fear and the destruction of entire worlds, had no defense against the resilience of humanity. Earth, a fractured and divided world just months earlier, now stood united, its forces unstoppable. Voss and his team moved to the next phase of their plan, the complete decimation of the Zarnok's remaining forces. There could be no half measures. The Zarnok had proven themselves a threat too great to leave unchecked, and Earth's resolve could no longer be questioned. They had made the Zarnok bleed. Now, they would finish the job. The final push came at the Zarnok's last stronghold, a remote military outpost deep within their territory. It was a fortress, heavily fortified and defended. But Voss wasn't concerned with their numbers anymore. The Zarnok, broken and leaderless, would not be able to defend against Earth's combined forces. "We take this stronghold and we ensure they can never come back," Voss said, his voice firm. His gaze swept across the room, meeting each of his officers. "We fight to end this." The assault on the outpost was brutal. Earth's forces fought with everything they had, each soldier driven by the memory of their fallen comrades. Each strike an answer to the Zarnok's brutality. The enemy's resistance was fierce, but fragmented. Their ability to coordinate was gone. Their will to fight had evaporated. As Earth's forces pushed deeper into the Zarnok stronghold, Voss could feel the weight of victory within his grasp. The Zarnok were scattered, leaderless and broken. The battle was almost over, but Voss knew the cost. Ruiz's sacrifice, the countless lives lost in this war, would not be forgotten. They had won, but the scars would remain. In the final moments of the battle, the Zarnok fleet, once an overwhelming force, retreated into the dark corners of the galaxy, their leaders no longer capable of holding their fractured empire together. "We've done it," Max said, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're retreating." Voss stood still, his face unreadable. "It's over, but we'll never forget what it took to get here." As the Zarnok retreated into the darkness, leaving behind the wreckage of their once mighty empire, Earth's victory was sealed. But the price had been steep. The war had cost them everything, and yet Earth had proven itself indomitable. The Zarnok's empire was no more. Earth had survived. The galaxy would never forget. Earth was not what it had once been. The scars of war ran deep, visible in the silent streets of once bustling cities, in the quiet graveyards where names etched into stone stood as symbols of loss. But Earth was alive. It was stronger, more united, and its resolve had been forged in the fires of the most desperate battle it had ever faced. The war against the Zarnok, a fight that had pushed humanity to its limits, had ended in a decisive victory, but the cost was heavy. Commander Voss stood before a monument that had just been unveiled in the heart of the capital. The memorial was simple but powerful. A statue of a soldier, their face resolute, their weapon at their side, and above them a name, Alina Ruiz. A single phrase was engraved beneath the figure, unyielding spirit. Voss ran his fingers over the cold stone, feeling the weight of the loss that Ruiz's sacrifice had left behind. She had given everything to ensure that humanity had a future, and that future had arrived. The Zarnok were no more, their empire shattered, their fleets broken. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's resilience, and now, Earth stood as a symbol of defiance. The following day, Voss stood before the United Nations. The representatives of every nation on Earth gathered in one room. His uniform was crisp, his face tired but determined. The war had taken its toll on him, but there was something different now in the way he carried himself. An unspoken confidence, the weight of victory and loss mixed together. "Today," he began, his voice steady but resonant, "we stand on the precipice of a new era. The Zarnok, once thought invincible, are no more. Their retreat was not just a retreat of their fleets. It was a retreat of their arrogance, their belief that they could trample over us, crush our spirit. They were wrong." He paused, letting his words settle in the air. The room was silent, all eyes on him. "We have adopted the Voss-Ruse Doctrine, a framework that will guide us in the years to come. We've learned from this war. We will integrate cyber warfare, guerrilla tactics, and an unwavering spirit into our strategy. Our enemies will never underestimate us again." The room remained still, absorbing the weight of his words. Voss didn't look away from the faces before him, each one marked by the shared history of the war. He could see the doubt, the fear that had once been present now replaced by a quiet strength. "We must remain vigilant. The universe is vast and we will face more threats. But we are no longer a fragmented world. We are no longer a species divided by borders, by differences. We are a united force, a force that no one will dare challenge." The room broke into subdued applause. It was a muted, somber recognition of everything Earth had endured, but it was enough. The people of Earth had witnessed their darkest hour and had emerged stronger. Their unity had forged a future that, just months before, had seemed impossible. Days later, the global leaders gathered for a joint press conference. News outlets around the world broadcast the event live. Voss addressed the camera, his face reflecting both exhaustion and pride. "Today, Earth stands as a beacon of hope," Voss declared. "We were pushed to the brink of extinction. The Zarnok, with their vast fleets, their unimaginable power, came to our doorstep with a simple message: surrender. We refused. And in that refusal we found something greater than survival. We found our strength." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "We don't just fight to survive, we fight to thrive, and we've shown the galaxy that humanity's spirit cannot be broken." His words echoed through the hearts of millions, but it was the quiet moments that truly marked the shift in humanity's destiny. Memorials were built not only for those who had fallen, but for the lessons they had left behind. Across the globe, people came together to honor the sacrifices of the fallen, including Ruiz, whose name would live on in history not just as a casualty of war, but as the embodiment of Earth's unbreakable will. In the weeks that followed, Earth began to rebuild, but it was different now. No longer was it a fragile world vulnerable to the whims of the cosmos. Earth had proven its might, its resolve, and its unity. But the cost of this victory was still too fresh, the grief still too raw. The remnants of the Zarnok's retreat were still being felt in every corner of the galaxy. Voss stood at the head of a new council, Earth's voice now strong and clear in galactic affairs. The Zarnok's retreat had not gone unnoticed. Other empires, watching from the shadows, had taken note. Earth was no longer a species to be ignored. They had earned their place among the stars. "The galaxy will never forget what happened here," Voss said to his council. "We've made sure of that." He looked out the window, the earth below him shining with an undiminished light. It had been a hard-fought victory. Earth had lost much, but what it had gained was invaluable. The final resolution came not in the form of grand speeches or celebratory parades, but in the quiet acknowledgement that Earth was no longer simply a planet. It was a symbol of strength, of defiance, and of the unyielding spirit of its people. The Zarnok, with all their power, had failed to break humanity. They had underestimated Earth. And in that underestimation, the galaxy had learned a hard truth. Earth does not surrender. As the final remnants of the Zarnok fleet disappeared into the dark void, Earth's future was sealed. No longer a fledgling species scrambling for survival, Earth had become a force to be reckoned with, a force that would stand tall, unyielding, against whatever the universe had to offer. The galaxy would now remember humanity was not to be underestimated. The victory over the Zarnok had reshaped the balance of power, and Earth's legacy would live on, not as a conquered world, but as a sovereign force that could never again be broken. If this story left a mark, hit that like button, subscribe for more Humanity First legends, and drop your favorite Quill moment in the comments below.